Pērā pērā ka tīmata tātou. Tākiri mai te ata, ko te ata i tua, ko te ata i waho, ko te ata i ahau. Te kotahi a tūhoe ka kata te pō. E te iwi tēnā koutou. Kua riro mai te honore ki roto i ahau ki te whakatūwhere wa tātou nei kaupapa mo tēnei rā. O ti rā, e aiki nā tikana i tuku i hoki a mātou e nā mātou e nā tīpuna. Ka tīmata wa tātou kaupapa nei runa ke te karakia. No re tēnā koutou. Rongo mā tāne mauri tau kia kia tau. Rongo i te whiwhia, tū i te whiwhia. Kia mau ki te kupu, e tipu ai te kupu ki tōna iho matua. Rongo mā tāne mauri tau kia kia tau, whakatau wairua. E te iwi, kua riro mai te honore, ki roto i ahau ki te mihi kia koutou katoa. Hora atu te motu, hora atu hoki i te ao, kua tau mai ki tēnei kaupapa, i raro iho te kora wai o te aroha. Nō reira kia koutou katoa, huri noa te ao, e mihi ake anoa hau kia koutou. Huri kau ana aku mahara ki te kaupapa o tēnei rā, ara ko nā kōrero e pāna ki tēnei kaupapa whakahirihira a te Māori, ara ko tōna ake mātaurana. Engari, e tikāna ka huri aku whakaaro ki te rangatira kia koe tā haere William. E mihi nui kia koe mo tō whakautu ki tō mātou karanga kia hara mai koe ki te toha i au mātaurana, i au pukena, i runake nei tēnei kaupapa kaimui a tātou i tēnei rā. E hōnore nui tēnei kia hau ki te mihi kia koe. He kaupapa tino nui tēnei kia hau, i te mea, i raro iho te kaupapa i wērā mea o te tiriti o Waitangi, me nā kōrero i tuku i hoki a mātou e nā mātua, me nā tīpuna. Nō reira i runa i tērā, e te rangatira, e tuku nā te mihi kia koe i tēnei rā. Nō reira tēnā koe anō. Huri aku mahara kia rātou kua haere ki tua te ārai. Haere e nā mate, haere. Haere ki o tīpuna whakauru te moe. Nō reira e nā mate, kua marini nai roi mata pataka te hutue. Kua ea. E te iwi, he kōrero iti nei tāku i tēnei wā, engari, ko te tumanako ka mihi atua hau kia koutou anō, mo tō koutou kaha ki te hāpai tēnei kaupapa. Nō reira, poi iti he mihi mahana atu kia koutou katoa. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, kia ora hui mai tātou katoa. Kia ora i tēnei wā, ka huri te rākau kia koe te rangatira. Kia mata nā kōrero mo tēnei wā.
Ka tiki nā atua tētahi kupu whakatau aki mai a ngai tūhoi. E tui mo i te rā, kia kore ai koe ki te ata. Kia hau nei, kai reira tāu o te rangatahi Māori, o tātou o te iwi Māori, e tua nei. Kei te titiro atu ki te ata, e whiti mai ana. Engari ka hore i te titiro i raro i o rātou waiwai, te ata ki raro i ngā waiwai. Nō reira e rua ngā whakamāramatanga mo tērā kupu, mo te ata. Ko te ata, i ahu mai, i whānau mai i te pō. Ko te ata, kei raro i te tinana o te tangata, e whai ana i aia, te ata te kaitiaki. E mohio nei tāu i roto te reo o William Shakespeare, The Shadow on the Land. Nō reira, ka mihi kia koutou, kua tau mai ki roto i tēnei kaupapa, tino nui, whakahirahira, whakamataku i te tangata, whakamataku i āhau, engari, kai konei hei tui, ia tāua, kia rātou kua riro ki te pō, me ā tātou rangatahi, me ā tātou tamariki. Kia whakamutua te kōhuru i te rākau, i te kauri. Whakamutua te kōhuru i te tohora. Whakamutua te tūkino i a tātou wāhine, me ā tātou tamariki. Nō reira, kia koutou katoa, kia kaha, kia māia, Paia i te kahurangi, ki te tuahu koe, tuahu I mua I te rā, kia kore ai koe ki te iti ata.
Kia ora. So Hare, at this point, I think we are expecting quite a few people, not only from this country and the South Pacific, but from around the globe. I think certainly on behalf of all of us here today, that we're really looking forward to your kōrero today, and for the honour of sharing what you have to say with us in terms of this really important aspect of Mātauranga Māori. Pretty pertinent to what we are seeing today in the current environment, I think, and I think there's some truths in what you're going to share with us today that will be both enlightening and useful in terms of how we might look at te ao, at the world. So really very much looking forward to what you have to share with us today. Thank you very much. So at this point, I think we hand it back to you and ata whakarono, kia kōrero, kia ora.
I whānau mai au I Turanga Nui, Akiwa. I was born in Gisborne at Te Karaka, underneath a cabbage tree, according to my grandmother, Waiweka Brown of Te Karaka. And at a very early age, I was the gift to my tūhoe side of me, who lived at Ohiwa, my grandmother, Wairemana, the daughter of Taihakua Poniwahio of Ruatoki, and the granddaughter of Tūtaka Ngaha. And so I was gifted from my Aitanga Mahaki and Roga Whakaata side to that family. So I grew up in the nurtured environment of sea, ocean, but the deepest part of my early childhood was to be steeped in te reo, no English. My grandmother spoke no English. She knew 3 words perfectly: Michael Joseph Savage, because Michael Joseph Savage gave them the old age pension, and they were able to save up what little bit they can on a very marginal land at Ohiwa. But we had no starvation, everything we needed came from the land, the bush, ngā rongoa that came from the bush, everything we ever needed. I saw no hunger in my family at the time. So the land, quite often my grandfather would say, look out across the land, e moko. Can you see God's face? I look around and say, no. My grandfather, you must be mad. They look at the water of the harbour. Can you see God's face? No. They look at the bush. Can you see God's face? But everything was geared towards their devotion to the Hāhiringatu. Everything they did was predetermined by the Hāhi. The Ringatu Church, founded by Te Kōti in bondage on the Chatham Islands, where he was sentenced. According to my uncle George Brown of Te Karaka, George Brown, Te Kōti, and 298 people, men, women, and children, were exiled to the Chatham Islands to die. Prisons were set up as a process of colonizing Māori. Some of our people were sent to Van Diemen's Land, that's Tasmania in Australia, other parts of the country, but they were exiled because they were a bit too smart. They owned ships, they owned agriculture. You know, if you drew a line from Thames to Pihikihi, down to Waiuku, across to Clevedon, back again to Thames, Waikato, Tainui, and the Hauraki tribes owned and operated 37 flour mills. The prosperity of this country came from Māori. So by 1861, our country was in the grip about to be stripped of our land. On the 9th of July 1864, George Grey put out a proclamation for Waikato to declare allegiance to the Queen, and if they didn't, they were treated as rebels and they were going to lose their land anyway. So if you look at those flour mills, that's only a part of the prosperity of Māori that contributed to the GDP, to the economy of this country in a huge way. The generosity of our people in the 1830s and 40s donated land as koha to the church, to build schools, to build churches. And they went out and cut the timber and helped to build the churches and the styles that we know. And Tamati Ngāpora of Mangere built St. James Church. They quarried the stones from Mangere Mountain and they built St. James Church. Ngāpora wanted to go away and become a lay preacher, so he went away for 3 years. This is in 1861. He trained as a lay preacher and then came back in 1868 to Mangere to find that everything was changed. The church, Māori avoided the church. Tawhio had no longer involved in the work of the church in Mangere. And so Ngāpora decided never to step back into that church again. 2 weeks ago, I went to that church. It's still the same building built by Ngāpora in 1861. There should be a celebration of that church. There are so many things happened in this area, and Waikato especially. And I'm a very proud person to be living amongst Waikato, Tainui, Ngāti Whātua, and the Ngāpuhi tribes amongst them, because they cared for me in a big way. So what did we do as a result of colonization? We as a people returned the hostility with kindness. It's called manaakitanga. We returned it with the koha, or reciprocity, giving something to our manuhiri tuarangi who arrived in New Zealand. We joined the spirit of developing this nation, a new nation. The Colonial Office in London and the Church Missionary Society made it very, very clear to Hobson that whatever happens in New Zealand between the chiefs and William Hobson and his people was to be done with absolute honesty, integrity, to be scrupulously carried out by William Hobson. So the trust was there. Goes right back to Samuel Marsden. And so our people returned, that they gave their generosity. We're still giving that generosity. Ngāti Whātua in 1840 handed 3,000 acres of land, Apihai Te Kauau, to William Hobson. It was a koha. It wasn't given to the Crown to sell, but immediately the Crown sold it for 300% interest. You know, that's good business, isn't it? And so we have a litany of betrayals in the early, in the post-treaty area. Prehistory, there were great promises. And so our people still believe that kindness begets kindness. Hostility begets hostility. So return hostility. You know, the hikoi to Waitangi with Tite Whai Harawira and Whina Cooper, Joe Hawke, Hannah Jackson and Sid Jackson, all of those people believed in marching with kindness to return the hostility on the roads and on our streets, in their homes, with the kindness that is an emblem of Māori culture. So the toxic fumes of colonization still besets us. Our children, who are now nearly my age, still don't know how to speak Te Reo. It's improving a bit. I hope we don't lose it, because the political setup at the moment, I think those things that we've worked for up since the 2 decades between 1964 and 1984, I see it slipping away. Nō reira, Rangiriri and Belgium. Rangiriri and Belgium and Gallipoli. Our people fought in the trenches and the bunkers of those places to bring freedom to their children, a free education, free health service, to build their homes on their own land. They went away, and our people died, are buried in countries in Europe. So I look at the tools of colonization. What are the tools of colonization? I've been a school teacher all my life, even though I've had a stint in broadcasting. Broadcasting is a tool for decolonization. And that's one of the reasons I joined broadcasting, because the potential for broadcasting to analyze the history of our country. Selwyn Muru, haere Selwyn. Muru Walters was another broadcaster. Henare Te Ua. Wiremu Kerekere. You know, these are people who laid the foundation for looking at equality in our country. You know, one time I joined Hone Tūwhare at a hikoi from a marae at Waioomio over to Waitangi. And we got on the road, and I had a microphone with me. And I said to Hone Tūwhare, Hone, do a poem for me while we're walking. He grabs the microphone, the wrong thing to do when, you know, somebody grabs the microphone and you never get it back, especially somebody like Hone Tūwhare. And he starts off. I'm going to say exactly what he said. So you'll have to excuse an expletive in this piece. I'm going to select just the piece he started off with. He said, "What the fuck are we walking to Waitangi in the uncomfortable jackboots of the Pākehā?" He spoke for 10 minutes, wouldn't give me the microphone. And this long poem. And at the end, he ends by saying, "Hey, haere mai Pākehā, my mate, haere mai mate, take my hand, let's walk together, back barefooted, without the jackboots of the Pākehā, to Waitangi." You know, the reversal of the whole process of Waitangi, Hone Tūwhare, captured in that poem. I admitted that interview with the Radio New Zealand. They said, "You have to change that word or put bleeps on it." I said, "No, you'll ruin that poem. If you do that, you're going to kill it." And so they never used it. Last year, one of the broadcasters in Radio New Zealand interviewed me, and I quoted that poem, Walking to Waitangi. And I said, you're not going to get it past the general manager of Radio New Zealand. And he went to Radio New Zealand, to Thompson, and requested that he use that piece in the interview. And he was able to do it. And that's a very long time to wait for that word to be used there. There are words like kia ora and ngā mihi is being denied access to our health department, maybe is in danger at the moment. So another partai, Trevor. Give me a break, I'll have a drink.
Well, perhaps I was really interested in the kōrero you and I were having before this started today around this interesting idea of serendipity. And you kind of drew on that with your touching on how we're all about kindness begetting kindness. I'm interested in maybe exploring the serendipity kaupapa a little bit more with you.
Serendipity, yeah, you'll shock your listeners with that word. But I believe serendipity walked with me, Trevor, all my life. Why was it that I was adopted by my grandparents at an early age? Why was it we lived at Ohiwa, at Karaka, where Te Koti was mortally wounded and died? Why did I fail school certificate, or the other way around, fail school certificate, failed Māori kids and Pākehā kids too? There was serendipity. I went back to school for a second time to get school certificate because I wanted more than anything else to become a school teacher. Becoming a school teacher, is that serendipity? My grandmother, Wairemana of Ohiwa, took me up to the top of a hill. I've written a children's story about this. And when we were up there, she looked out across the whole valley, right across to Opotiki, from Ohiwa, across to Te Kaha. And she said, look at the land, kōrero Māori mai ana ki ahau, te tiro ki te whenua, the manoeka, thousands of acres. Can you see 1,000 acres? And I look around and said, no. I didn't have a clue what she was talking about. I said, when you see 1,000 acres, you'll see 1,000 tragedies. You'll see 1,000 cowards. You'll see 1,000 heroes. I didn't comprehend all of that. And then she made a prophecy. Ka ki mai kia, a tono wā, ka tai mai kia koe, ngā whakaaturanga o tūpuna kai muri a koe e tūana. She predicted, she said, one day you might become a teacher. You might become a doctor. You might become a lawyer. You might become one of those fancy members of parliament. And I went away believing that I was going to be those things. And serendipity kicked in again. Because today, my son, Hemi, is a specialist doctor. My daughter, Kitty, is in Thailand teaching English to English people and Thai people. My daughter, Arena, is a member of parliament and she has a double degree in law. The prophecy wasn't about me, It's about my children, which our children, if we're looking for the greatest investment we can make, the greatest investments that we can make is nature, our children, and the future. Nature, our children. Let's all, to all of you who are listening to this, let's make huge investments in the bank of kindness. Tomorrow, when you go to work, everyone you meet tomorrow, every animal you meet, every tree you go past, every insect that comes out of your garden, everything you reap from the trees in your garden, show them your kindness, your serendipity, your aroha for everything. So while the hostility is brewing up in our parliament, return that hostility with what King Tuheitia has exhorted us to do. Kia kotahi tātou te iwi Māori. Whakakotahi a tātou te kotahitanga. And you probably can hear my grandchildren running around outside, and they are my greatest joy. So I'm investing in them. We have a bush next door here, and we go there often to talk to Tāne Mahuta, to give us the energy, the ngākau mahaki, the wairua. The bush is about regeneration, the recycling of life. The bush teaches us about cooperation, working with each other, looking after the little ones, taking care of the elders, the ones who have died, the whole social fabric of renaissance, of recovery, and so on. Cooperation, that's what the bush is. My gate to my wharewana, and we have a bush right here next door to me. So kia kaha tātou ki te whai atu i ngā tūmanakotanga, a o tātou mātua tūpana, ngā waihotanga i hoki a tāhau. Tēnei mea te ngahere, te moana, te whenua. Our search for wisdom is embodied. You know, when you look at a wave, the wave is only as strong as the frailty of the foam. The mountain is only as great as the tender daisy that grows on the side of the mountain. And so a king or a leader or a rangatira, their strength is made perfect in the weakest part of their whānau. And so what did the treaty do in 1840 for us? Our people had great expectations of the Treaty of Waitangi, the Treaty of Waitangi. The Treaty of Waitangi is a different document altogether. The Treaty of Waitangi promised a lot of things, but Māoris remained with that promise. We did not betray the promise. We're still true to the Treaty of Waitangi. It's the talisman for us when things go wrong. We can always revert back to the Treaty of Waitangi. So the historical amnesia is taking place in New Zealand. I think I pay a tribute to people like Claudia Orange, Judith Binney, the academic from Tainui who wrote an extensive book on the history of Tainui. It'll come back to me shortly. But it's not a time for amnesia. It's a time for us to reshape and develop strategies with our rangatahi, Māori and Pākehā and other cultures coming together to structure a way forward. The Treaty of Waitangi embodies in the principle 7 of the Treaty of Waitangi our association with the diversity of cultures, their religious beliefs, and their tikanga coming to New Zealand. They are accepted by the treaty in Principle 7. But it requires them to frequently examine the relationship between tangata tiriti and tangata whenua. The government does not do that. Our immigration department does not introduce our immigrants to the Treaty of Waitangi. And that's something that I'd like to follow up with my daughter Arana, to see that happen. When we have manuhiri come to this land, we give them a pōwhiri, maybe at Orake or any of the marae around Auckland, near the airport. There's a marae at the airport. We can give them a formal welcome and introduce them to why they need to know elements of Te Tiriti o Waitangi. So, the betrayal education in New Zealand is part of one of the tools, the most powerful tools of colonisation. I was a teacher. I didn't know that I was part of the colonisation process. I didn't teach any reo and any tikanga, any history at the school. I did a wee bit when I taught at Tauranga, Gate Pie. I wrote some plays about what happened around Tauranga and had the kids perform them in front of the whole school, you know, and one of them was Heni Karamu delivering water to Colonel Booth when he was dying because Taratua had agreed, set up a proclamation that not to molest women and children and the elderly, and when the wounded were lying on the field to stop the shooting, for the women to go out and look after the wounded, Pākehā and Māori on both sides, and the dying to look after them. Colonel Greer looked at Taratua when he delivered the piece of paper, and he looked at the piece of paper and he screwed it up like that, threw it over his shoulders. Taratua, what is this bullshit? Here, returning kindness with hostility. Delivering kindness to the soldiers. The British military did not do that. For those of you who are listening, you probably don't know that Pokeno, that's not the right name for that place, near Papakura. It's Pokeno, the Black Knight of Tainui, when they lost everything. It's Pokeno, not Pokeno. No such Māori word as Pokeno. Sounds awful too, eh?
Mm.
The establishment there had the state-of-the-art military weapons anywhere in the world. Not in America, not in India, not in China, not in Canada, not in the West Indies. New Zealand was the focus of the up-to-date military arsenal anywhere on the planet. If you put a dot on the law school in Auckland University and drew a line to Pokeno, there were 14 redoubts. What's a redoubt? I've been asked. A redoubt houses about 100. A column of troops is about 100 soldiers on horses. Can you hear my kids? And Pokeno, the Armstrong 48 cannons can throw a cannon nearly 2 miles. And they had those in Tauranga. There were 3 warships in Tauranga on the attack of Gate Pa. And so the military built up at Pokeno. Why? Because Waikato was the most prosperous Māori nation in New Zealand. They owned 37, owned and operated 37 flour mills. The prosperity, you can go to other tribal areas too. But on the 9th of July, 1864, George Grey's edict was to destroy canoes on the Manukau Harbour, on the Waikato River, destroy fruit trees and gardens. Boy, it's a bit hard to tell this story. And he raided those villages. The tūkinoi ngā kōtiro Māori. Ahoya. They debauched the young women in the villages. The troops came down on horses at Tuakau and pushed the people down to the river. They didn't have time to collect any of their tongue. their fruit trees were felled, their gardens destroyed. They got onto their canoes and sadly paddled up the river. These are elderly people, infirm, unable. They had strong relationships with the settlers in Auckland. They got on really well. And by 1858, there were only 23 Māori families living in Mangere. So that's the tragic part of our story. There must be a good side as well. Kai a koe he pātai.
Yeah, well, at this point, I'll open it up to the participants. If they've got any questions, then please share those through chat. I'm quite happy to put those questions to Tahare. In the meantime, I'm really interested in taking this conversation a little bit further, some other historical things I'm quite interested in, given your whakapapa. So, you know, I'm really interested in Te Koti and what happened during his lifetime, and particularly some of his quotes like "Mā te ture anō te ture e aki." What do you think he was thinking at the time? To me, I think he had realizations about what was coming.
Well, Trevor, you know one of his waiata ka hore te pō mō rika rika nei. Tiro tiro kau ana hau. In that waiata ka hore te pō mō rika rika nei. He predicted three things. And waiho mā te ture a te Pākehā e aki te ture a te Pākehā. That predates this waiata. A tōna wā, ka hoki mai te mana motuhake kia tāu e ki te iwi Māori. The mana of our land will be returned in time. A prophetic word in 1887, I think it was, 88. While he was on the run in New Zealand. E toru ngā mea ka whakahokia mai te mana motuhake. Three elements that will return our mana to our people. Tuatahi ko te tiriti o Waitangi. So the first one is te tiriti o Waitangi. Tuarua ko ngā koti whenua. The second are the courts of our land. We're doing that now. We're doing it in the highest court in New Zealand is Parliament. And we have getting more and more and more Māori in Parliament now. We have a Māori party in Parliament. That was part of his prophecy as well. Te ture a te Pākehā is in Parliament. Ngā kōti whenua, the United Nations. Ngā kōti whenua, the Privy Council in London. Ngā kōti whenua, The Hague. Just as an aside, I hope that George Grey will be brought to trial at The Hague one day because of his atrocities. He caused mayhem and starvation and killing to 61% of the population of this country. He should be answerable at The Hague. And also our own tupuna should be put on trial at the Hague. Te Koti, Te Waharoa, Tawhia, Te Whiti o Romai, to see their kindness, the world, the beautiful world they envisage for their children. And there are so many. Moko moko. Tātou ne? Me whakawā e ngā kōti o te ao. Okay, that's the second one, the courts of the land. Tuatoru ko te mana motuhake. Mana motuhake is to do with our arts. The art of our language, the arts of our wharenui, the tikanga of our wharenui, of our marae, and our faith in our traditional theology. You know, I was with a group of church people, 2 bishops from Israel 3 years ago, and I made a point that tikanga is the universal perspective of Christianity. in front of them. And one of the bishops sort of sat up a bit. And then afterwards, when we went to the wharekai, he said, I want to sit beside you and just explain to me what you mean by the universal perspective of Christianity. We had a great discussion. We won't have it here, but just in general, our whakapapa goes back beyond the Old Testament. We go back to Io Matua Kore Anake. Just that name alone, Io Matua Kore Anake. Io, the parentless one, without a parent. Io, the beginning. I te timatanga ko te kore, ko te pū, ko te wau, ko te āhunga, ko te āpunga, ko te kuneiti, ko te kunerahi, ko te pōpō kuna, ko te pō nui, ko te pō roa, ko te pō tifa, ko te pō kerekere. Ngā whakapapa of the pō, ngā whakapapa of the wind, whakapapa of the sun and the moon and the stars and everything. We have all of that sort of theology in our testament, in our journey, in our odyssey. Kai reira katoa ngā kōrero hohonu i whakatakotoria e tūtaka ngāhau kia Elston Best. Hea te mahi a Elston Best kia tāu, he takahi ia tāu. He called us a barbaric race. Tūhoe built him a house at Ruatoki on the other side of the river from Waikirikiri. I've sat in that house and I felt really honored. They kept the trees, they kept the lawns and the gardens, and the house was opened and fresh air and things. And Elston Best was treated as royalty by Tūhoe. And that's how he treated us. Why didn't he feel the mamae tūtaka ngāhau for the lands of Tūhoe in Te Urewera, stripped by sociologists, by anthropologists, by academics, by Christians, by teachers, by doctors, by lawyers? You know, the avalanche of colonization is still hurting our people, the bleeding on the land. But I believe this is a time for forgiveness. And then we'll open up for questions, Trevor. This is a time to reconcile our differences. This is a time for us to show the world that we can be the most livable small democracy on this planet. And it needs Māori to inject Māori philosophy into it. Māori science into our education system. Māori's history. Tikanga, wairua. You know, Pākehā people are a bit uneasy about the word spiritual, but they have no trouble using the word wairua. They feel, what a beautiful word, wairua, the living spirit in a tree, in a bird, in a worm, and those ugly spiders outside. They're all part of nature's creation. Wairua, what a beautiful word. But they're very, very uneasy about spirituality. Why? Because our children in school are not taught, they don't need to teach spirituality or wairua in schools in a Christian way. They can go to the bush and open the door and enter the portals of Tānemhotā. That's where they learn reverence. Reverence is respect for people, for land, for oceans, for ancestors, for one another, for mums and dads and our daughters. Our mums and our daughters are in danger at the moment. Look after them. Manakitia a tātou wāhine, whakamutua te tūkino i rātou. Nō reira, koe patai mai pe te waia mō ngā pātaitai e Trevor.
Kia ora. I think I'm still waiting for some. If anyone's got a really pressing question, please share that with...
You might have a question for me.
I might.
Kate might have a question.
Kate. Kate, I think that's a word for you. Do you have a...
There is a question in the Q&A at the bottom.
Oh, okay. Yep, so we have one from WH, not sure who that is to everybody, but certainly for you, I think, I'm not sure. Open racism is more present now than ever, especially on social media. Do you suggest that we just love those people? And is there any good in fighting back in media?
Yeah, well, it goes to hostility, and it's a very hard thing to turn the other side of the face and get slapped on the face and return hostility with kindness. That's the only virtue, I think, that is able to deal with the hostility. There's a lot of hostility in the world, a lot of unkindness, but we cannot continue to perpetuate that sort of world. Our children are growing up in that environment as well. They're feeling it. The gun speaks louder than the law. And I think we had evidence of kindness in New Zealand over the last 6 years. And a lot of a minority of New Zealand didn't like it and threatened, Jacinda Ardern. And she had to leave her job because of the threats to her and her family. And so the question is a valid one. How do we deal with the hostility on a global level? I think when I look at New Zealand, we still have the formula here in New Zealand to develop a peaceful nation. We have something unique that no other country in the world possess. We have Te Tiriti o Waitangi. We have Manaakitanga, and those two elements are a way forward of peace on our planet. And I think I'm serious when I say let's invest in the bank of kindness. We owe it to our children and to nature. You know, the degradation of nature is attributed directly to greed, to hunger, and to waste. The story of Maui, Tikitiki a Taranga, the youngest child of Makea Tūtara and Taranga. When they come back fishing, they've caught this huge fish, the Ika Maui. And when they land, Maui says to his brothers, wait till I return before you touch this great fish. So as soon as Maui disappears, the brothers, 4 brothers, started fighting over the fish. The fish is the land, remember? They fight and argue and threaten to kill each other. They cooked the bits they liked. They threw away what they couldn't eat. What does that tell us in Māori culture, in our philosophy? Philosophically, it tells us that greed and consumption and waste is distasteful and is not part of our culture. So te ika a Maui, then we see that in coronavirus 2 years ago. What was the cause of coronavirus? Greed, consumption, and waste. Look around you in your own household. How much waste do you see? How much greed is there in our country? I think New Zealand is, that serendipity thing again, is lucky to have Māori shaping the future of this country. Being bilingual and being bicultural is an asset to any person. So your children growing up with te reo, a lot of Pākehā are learning te reo as well. You have an advantage in our society. The benefits of bilingualism and biculturalism are important. This is something I attribute largely to Ranginui Walker and Hugh Kāwharu And those people in that world who paved the way for those things to come. So kindness, I know it's not an easy formula to achieve, but it's something we should strive for that. I haven't quite answered the pātai, have I?
Oh, you have. I think you have. I think we're just all immersed in your wisdom here today. So, no, thank you very much. I've got a question here from Tony Chens, I think, which is kind of drawing on, I think, your teaching acumen, your experience as a teacher some time ago. But how best should we teach mātauranga Māori, or mātauranga iwi, or mātauranga hapu?
Yeah, Trevor, my highest honour is to be called a teacher. I taught at Matauri Bay for 5 years as the principal there, and my wife was a junior teacher. And it was the people there who showed us the depth of what it is to teach in a community, using the hills, using the harbour, using the water for science and mathematics and physical exercises, the pā sites for history, the forest for the wairua and things like that. Man, I really learned how to teach when I was up there. And the people up there still call me our teacher. They never call me by my first name. They call me our teacher. Ngā kaumati o tērā marae o tāua. Ka hoki au ki tūrau. He rereke ki reira, he rereke ki heak. But I'll always wear the title teacher as a badge of honour. Yeah, teaching, I think, the teaching of the youngest children is the most important. Mums are the first teachers of our children. They give birth to the future. The first inclination of love is the mum. Our mums are threatened at the moment. After our mums, they are the foundation of any society. The next part of the teaching profession are kindergarten and kohanga reo teachers. I'm doing a lot of work now with kohanga reo and early childhood educators. And I work on they asked me to give them a perspective on Māori storytelling. How does Māori tell story? So I tell that story of Maui fishing up the North Island. And a couple of kindergartens here in Manurewa are really into the Maui stories at the moment. They send me pictures, and my moko comes home with their drawings, and she does drawings here of Maui in the morning at 4 o'clock when she comes down. She says, "Can I have a story of Maui koko," with her hands together like this? We'll have a karakia first, then we'll have a story of Maui. And when we go for a walk, you know, the seasons, we don't go in a car to her kohanga, to her kindy, and my other moko goes to the primary school. We walk along the road and notice the seasonal changes, you know, the birds and things. And one day I told my 4-year-old granddaughter, those are tui in there, they're singing, and do you know what they're doing? She said, yes, they're building a new home for their babies. Yes, that's exactly. What do they build their homes? What's the home? What do they build with? Straw and ferns and sticks and feathers and things. And why the feathers? To keep it warm. And she's got all these images in her head. And I said, but what happens? This is a lesson in tino rangatiratanga. What happens when somebody chops that tree down? Because some of these trees are going to get chopped down. You know, she nearly cried. She said, the tui won't have a home for their babies. When they cut the tree, where are they going to live? And here's a 4-year-old already connecting with the ecosystem. And yeah, as a teacher, I'll always be a teacher. In my work in broadcasting, my work with the Waitangi Tribunal, I was never on the Waitangi Tribunal, but I helped iwi to prepare their claims. I've been with the 1990 Commission that took 21 waka up to Waitangi. So to see waka up there this year, oh man, it was fabulous. It reminded me of 1990 when we had all those waka up there. But cooperation, I think, is a big thing to do with the Treaty o Waitangi. The treaty allowed strangers to step over the threshold onto our marae, into our wahitapu, and onto our land. That's tikanga in its most pure form, the Treaty o Waitangi. Tikanga allows us to extend generosity and hospitality to people who come to our nation. And we've done that over and over and over again. You know, I work on 5 R's. The first one is respect. Think about that. The second one is responsibility. This is in a karaki. I do this in a karaki. The third one is responsiveness. How do we respond to the challenges of the time, to the question, you know, what are we going to do to improve the history and the relationships in New Zealand? So responsiveness. The next one is the principle of koha, to give, to receive. The other bit we forget is to return. There are 3 sides to the koha: the giving, the receiving, and the return. In the Pākehā world, you give something, it's finished. It's either paid for or it's closed, but a koha is never closed. If I give you a taonga at your daughter's wedding, you receive it. That's the second part of the koha. The third part is it obligates you in time to bring something back to my family to return that koha. That's called reciprocity, to return. The return is so what do we return to the earth? The earth gives us, it's giving us all the time. It gives, it gives, it gives, it gives. A tree gives. I wrote a poem about my grandmother, Waiwaika Brown of Gisborne, who spoke to trees, and fruit trees, just bountiful in fruit in the seasons. When she died, the trees grew old and withered away too. Our Naniwai sang to orchard trees, calling each by name. We didn't really know why. Trees give their best. For trees to hold back is to die. Let's give like trees, with earth for mother, sky for father. They hold back nothing. The year Naniwai went, the trees grew old and died. We didn't know why. We're beginning to know why now, eh? People are starting to talk to trees, talk to stars, talk to whales, talk to kauri trees. And those trees, those whales, and those elements in our natural world enjoy the human touch, the voice of the human being.
Tēnā pai rau atu, e te matua. Engari, kua tāu wawe mai mātou ki te whakakapina o tātou nei kōrero mo tēnei rā. Engari, anō ko te tumanako, ka mihi atu ahau mo tō kaha ki te toha i au mātaurana e pāna kia koe, e pāna hoki ki wā tātou nei tīpuna. Kai te mihi, kai te mihi, kai te mihi atu anō ahau ki a koe. Nō reira, kua tae mai, te whakamutina o wā tātou kōrero mo tēnei rā. Tērā pēr, muri iho, ka noho ai tāua ki te kōrero anō.
Mā koe pia tu tā wā tāua kōrero nei. He honore kroria ki te atua, ma ngā rongo ki te whenua. Whakaaro pai ki ngā tāngata katoa. Āmene.
Āmene. Kia ora mai rā. Kia ora everybody. Thank you very much for joining in this wonderful kōrero today.